Welcome, and this is a very special Yom Iyun, pre-Chanukah Yom Iyun here at the OUisrael and Bet Knesset Hanasi. It's really special to be with you. As you know, I've been away for the last couple of weeks, driving around America and recruiting. Somebody asked me if I'd had a nice vacation, and I looked wistfully to the stars and said, like, halavai. I drove 1,500 miles around North America, and I spoke 24 times while I was there. So vacation. This is my vacation, okay? Come be back to speak to you nice people. If I could ask you please to turn your phones off, that would be very helpful. And if I could also announce the sponsorship of the Shir. The Shir is sponsored by Sharon and Michael Cronenberg. Le'ilu Nishma is Sharon's mother, Harabanit Rivka Bat Harav Shimon Asher. And Ibadul Ben Chaim L'Chaim as a mazel tov for the birth of a new grandson, Chaim Eliyahu Ben Shimon Asher. And I assume the Shimon Asher there is related, connected. Are the sponsors here in the audience today? Oh, very nice. Thank you very, very, very much. I assume the Shimon Asher grandson is the Shimon Asher grandfather, which is a great-grandfather, which is a very beautiful closing of a circle as Baruch Hashem, the Jewish community moves on to a new door of new Giburim. And today's Shir actually is dedicated to the idea of Gvura. I wasn't sure exactly what did Rabbi Glaser just speak about, Glaser? He spoke about the menorah, the flames of history in the light of destiny. Excellent. And this looks excellent. I wish I'd been here. I'm sorry I wasn't. And I'd like to speak about Gvura as well. Gvura is a topic which is very connected with Chanukah. But I'd like to talk about a certain kind of Gvura of Chanukah that sometimes gets a little overlooked. As we're rolling out the Chanukah songs, you'll all be singing in your head the Chutznik songs, and there's the Israeli songs. And of course, one of the Israeli songs famous for Chanukah is Mi Yamalel Gvurot Yisrael. You can sing it in your heads. And of course, that is an interesting take. It's a very Israelification, it's a secularization of a pasuk in Tehillim Kuvav, which is Mi Yamalel Gvurot Hashem. So the assumption there, which I'd like to suggest is a false dichotomy, is that the only way we can move from here on is to change Mi Yamalel Gvurot Hashem to Mi Yamalel Gvurot Yisrael. I mean, it also rhymes, which is helpful for the song. But there actually is no dichotomy there. And that's one of the classic mistakes of secular Israeli culture, that they think that there has to be a break away from the Gvurot Hashem in order to get to the Gvurot Yisrael. And actually, we'll see straight away at the beginning of the Shir, even if you don't look in Chazal, they'll say, oh, well, Chazal, they're obviously religious. They're moving it to a religious place. No, not just Chazal, but Sefer HaMaccabim itself. We'll see very clearly that what they felt in the time of the Maccabim that they were fighting for, or at least when they recorded the Sefer HaMaccabim, which is not that long after, is not just Gvurot Hashem, but also Gvurot Yisrael. They both go together. So let's make a start. Let's start with Ala Nisim, coming up soon in a siddur near you. Bimei Matatyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonai. So back in the days of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Uvanav K'she'amda Malchut Yavan Harasha Al Amcha Yisrael. The wicked Greek nation rose up against, and the Hellenist approaches rose up against Israel. And the first thing on the list, what is the first thing that they were trying to do? Lahashkicham Toratecha. They were trying to get us to forget. And this word shichacha is a code word. It's an important word. It's not just a word that is thrown in randomly. The aim of this process of the Greeks, as far as at least this angle is concerned, is to make us forget our Torah, and to try and leave off from observance of mitzvahs. But the idea of forgetting the Torah is brought in clearly in the speech, the very rousing speech of Yehuda Maccabi. And that's why I wanted to bring you a much less well-known source, in source number 2, from Sefer HaMaccabim, that records here, when the Jews, when the Maccabim and their forces saw how many non-Jewish soldiers were lined up against them, the power, the weapons, the missiles that they were forced to face, they said, We're going out, there's relatively few of us. And we are weak, we haven't eaten, we've been fasting, we have no koach to fight these people. How are we ever going to face up to all these nations, many fronts, a war on many, many fronts against missiles that we can't even imagine? Vayan Yehuda, and Yehuda answers them and says, V'yomar, Hayad Hashem tiksal atet rabim b'yad ma'atim. And here you see rabim b'yad ma'atim here in Sefer HaMakkabim, before the Alanissim, or at the same time as it was written. Is God not able to give over the many to the few? Ha'im yesh ma'atzor lo la'oshia b'rav o ma'at. God can save whether there are many or few against you. Hein la'Hashem atshua. God is the one who gives ultimate salvation. V'roiv chayil lo yimalet. Okay, and He won't help if people come at you with great numbers. If God wants you to win, you'll win. Hein botchim al amunah hamonam. They trust in their numbers, in their weapons. Va'al rov chaylam. Ulashmidam al nashenu v'tapenu. They are here to kill not just you as soldiers. They're not interested in just killing soldiers. They're here to wipe you out. He says to the men, they're here to kill you. They're here to kill your wives. They're here to kill your families and your children. Ulavoiset shlalenu, and to steal all your money. Va'anachnu na'amod al nafshenu. We are going to stand. We're going to save our own lives. Lehilachem ba'at chayenu v'toratenu. Chayenu v'toratenu. That's not something which was added by Chazal. That's added by Yehuda Maccabi. Chayenu v'toratenu. Ulechein al tiraun. So don't be scared. Va'al tatzru mipneihem. Don't run away. Don't be scared in front of them. Ki yashmei tashmidem Hashem le'einenu. And God will give us a salvation. And I don't need to tell you how unbelievably exciting and inspiring it is to be in a loop of Jewish history and destiny here in the land of Israel, where the fights and the wars and the inspiration of Yehuda Maccabi resonates to us today in what we've seen over the last months and the last year, the struggles, the hardships, the loss, and yet the salvation. It's quite remarkable, and therefore I find these words, these lines from Yehuda Maccabi very, very impactful. And it's important that he's saying we're fighting for Torah. What does he mean we're fighting for Torah? So the idea of gvura relating to Torah study is actually very central. And I think this is one of the main themes of Chanukah, which we're going to bring out here as well. The idea that you have to be very strong to be committed to a life of Torah and to learning Torah, specifically Torah Shebaal Peh. And I'm not just talking about the traditional learning sitting in a yeshiva with a chavrusa, but the life devoted to and dedicated to Torah. Look at number 3, Amar Reish Lakish. Ein divrei Torah miskayim. A life of Torah can only be fulfilled and can only be lived ele b'mi shemeimit atzmo alea. Someone, they have to kill themselves over it. Not literally, obviously, but they have to really dedicate themselves to it. It's not something for the faint-hearted. Shenema zot Torah Adam in Bamidbar there with the Tumat mates. Zot Torah Adam ki yamut ba'ohel. Now, obviously, it's playing with those words. It's not on the pshat level. It doesn't mean this is the Torah of the person who kills themselves. But the Chazal is saying this is the Torah. This is what Torah requires. A person, Adam ki yamut ba'ohel, who dedicates themselves 100%. And of course, this is not relevant to men. This is relevant to all Jews. The mitzvah of dedication to Torah as avodat Hashem and ahavat Hashem. And don't forget, specifically ahavat Hashem, when the Rambam brings down the mitzvah of ahavat Hashem, of connecting to God, of loving God. This is a mitzvah which applies equally to men and to women. This is mitzvah number 3 of 613. And when the Rambam says that, how can we do ahavat Hashem? How can we be so dedicated? V'chol levavcha, uv'chol nafshecha, uv'chol miyodecha. These are not just words, they're very impactful. He says, well, look at the next line. V'ayu advarim ha'eleh asher anuchi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha. The answer to how to do this, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol miyodecha, is learn these words, study these texts, understand these ideas. This is the idea of connecting to God intimately. We'll see even more of that in a few minutes through learning Torah. What's the first word in Shulchan Aruch? The first word. Yit gaber, be a gibor. Yit gaber, ka'ari la'amod baboker la'avodat borah. Be a gibor. Every Jew. This is not again talking to one group. Every Jew has to wake up in the morning like a gibor, like an Ari, like a lion. And again, it doesn't mean like a lion wakes up. If you look at lions in the zoo waking up, they're pretty sleepy for hours and hours on end. That's not what he's saying. With when a lion has his mind on something, he does it to do avodas Hashem. And I actually recommend, I didn't put it on the sheet, but I should have done. Where's my water gone? Here. There was a wonderful, wonderful essay written. It was a speech given by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal at the opening of Ma'ayanot High School. Ma'ayanot High School in Teaneck. Some of you here will be familiar with it. If you're not, it's worth a visit there. It's a wonderful institution. I've often been into Ma'ayanot High School. And one of the things I asked the young ladies studying in Ma'ayanot High School is, have you read Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's speech when he opened Ma'ayanot High School? And every single one of them just looks at me like, no. It should be required reading. And the whole speech, the whole drasha is about learning Avodat Hashem, and in particular as it relates to women. Of course, it relates to everybody. But the chidush there he's saying is, don't think because you're women, you do not have this yitgaber ka'ari la'amod baboker la'avodat boro. This is a very, very fundamental idea. And Torah Shebal Peh, in particularly, the oral law. Number 4, Gemara in Kiddushin. Vayasham echad. This is during the time of the Chashmonaim. Yanai HaMelech, who was the great-grandson, I think, if you work it out, of Yehuda Maccabi. Yanai HaMelech. Vayasham echad. Ish Leitz, there was a good-for-nothing man with him. Leiv Rau Belial, a really evil-hearted man. The Elazar ben Puriah Shmo, called Elazar ben Puriah. V'yomar Elazar ben Puriah leYanai HaMelech. Elazar says to Yanai HaMelech, Libam shel Purushim alecha. The minds, the hearts of the Pharisees, that's our guys, what became Chazal, they are against you, they're plotting against you. So he says, Maaseh, what can I do? And he goes through a whole suggestion of different things that he suggests. And eventually he says to him, Im ata shomei la'atzati, if you want to hear my advice, ramsem, wipe them out. Ramsem, destroy them, completely crush them. So Yanai says, Utoira ma'tehei alea. What's going to be with Torah if I kill all the rabbis? So he says, no. Hari krucha munacha b'keren zavid. What do you mean Torah? Torah is over in the corner of the room in the Aron Kodesh. You have a Sefer Torah. He's a king. He has a Sefer Torah, right? You have a Sefer Torah over there. Anyone who wants to learn can learn. Who needs rabbis? You don't need rabbis to learn Torah. It's like I say, when you meet Christian atheists, they have a problem with God. When you meet Jewish atheists, they have a problem with rabbis. They don't have a problem with God, Jewish atheists. They like God. They just have a problem with rabbis telling them what to do. If you want to learn Torah, go and open the Torah. Who needs a rabbi? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Miyad nizracha bo apikorsut. In Yanai HaMelech's head, there must have been at that point heresy. The Havalei Lameba, because he should have answered him, okay, Tinach Torah shebichtav. I get it. The written Torah they can just open and learn. Torah sheba'al peh mai. But what's going to be with the oral Torah? You can't just look that up. You need a relationship with that. You need a rabbi, a mentor, a teacher. Then terrible things broke out from that point. The Yargu kol chachmei Yisrael, and Yanai HaMelech kills the rabbinate. He goes in on a rampage, killing out the rabbis of the time. And this is, of course, after the Chanukah story. This is the descendants of Yehuda Maccabi who fell back into the ways of the Hellenists, and became Hellenists, and became themselves Sadducees later. And then the civil war of Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. Chanukah is not a story that ends well. It's a story that begins well. Okay, and it's important to remember that when we learn about Chanukah. The Hayaha Olam Mishtomem, and the whole Jewish world was wiped out. And there's a story of Shimon ben Shetach, who was, of course, the brother-in-law of Yanai HaMelech, and the story of how he restored Torah in that way, which I'm not getting into. But again, the focus there is on the oral Torah. Why the oral Torah? Number 5, the Al Yidei Torah Shebal Peh, says the Maharal, through the oral Torah, Shehi B'Peh Ha'adam. Where is the oral Torah? Not lying in the corner. It's in your mouth. It's in your mind. It's the billions of neurons sparking off each other in your mind right now. That is where the oral Torah is. Therefore, the oral Torah is you. The HaTorah hi imo legamre. Torah Shebal Peh is deep embedded in your very person. The Eino ala klaf ktuva. It's not, and he's obviously referring to this idea. He's not written on a klaf, on a parchment in the corner, which is obviously detached from you. It's written with ink on a cow skin. It's not you. Whereas Torah Shebal Peh, that is you. Bifnei atzmo rak. It's not, the Torah Shebal Peh is not on its own. Rakhi omedit ba'adam, it stands within you. Ulechein lo karat HaKadosh Baruch Hu brit im Yisrael. God didn't create a covenant with the Jewish people. Ela b'shvil dvarim shebal peh. He only did it on the oral law. Shneimar al pi hadvarim asher karti itzcha beh. Al pi hadvarim ha'ele asher karti itzcha brit. The covenant is al pi hadvarim. That joins two things together. Noisein habrit, the giver of the covenant, u'mekabel habrit, and the receiver of the covenant. Lo haTorah shebichtav shehi eino omedit ba'adam, and that's not the same as the written Torah, which is not in you, which is a very, very important idea. That the oral Torah at the end of the day is the ultimate bond between us and God. Because it's the Torah of God, in whatever way you understand Torah min hashamayim. It's a whole complicated issue, but it's embedded within the psyche and within the mind of the person itself. There was a wonderful program on the BBC, and you don't often hear people say that these days, but there was many, many years ago. It was the sounds of religions. I mentioned this before. What's the sound of the different religions? So they had people, exploring the sound of religion. So of course, for Islam, they had muazzin, calling people to prayer. For Christianity, they had bells ringing. For Buddhism, they had a gong. So what did they do for Judaism? The sound of latkes frying? No, they didn't do that. The guy went into the Mir Yeshiva and recorded 5,000 men screaming at each other, and they just played this cacophony of people screaming, and they said that is the sound of Judaism. People engaging directly, passionately with Torah, and of course that's all Torah Shebal Peh. That's what they're doing. It's not Kriyas HaTorah in Shul, which is Torah Shebechtav. It's the learning of Gemara, etc. And the concern always, when you're learning Torah Shebal Peh, is shichacha. Shichacha. Look in number 6. Ki bevada yoser haya royal HaTorah shetiyeh bechtav. Surely, says the Maharal, it would have been better to put the oral Torah in writing. Ki lo yavo shichacha bazeh. Because the written Torah can never be forgotten. It can be corrupted. It can be translated into Greek. And that was obviously a tragedy. You can read the ideas of the rabbis on why that was a tragedy. But the Torah Shebal Peh can be forgotten. Rak shehaya roy shitiyah Torah Shebal Peh gam kein bichsav. Why didn't they put it in writing? Moshe Ama Moshe, as Moshe requested in the Midrash. And on this the answer is Kitzarach shiteh kan Torah Shebal Peh. It has to be in your mind. Shitiyah Torah mu'ureset liYisrael. It has to be mu'ureset. Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha. The Torah is a morasha. It's a heritage. Chazal write, al tikre morasha ela me'urasa. The Torah is bonded to us, is engaged to us, is married to us. It's a bonding of two things. It has to be with us. It has to be in our minds. It's not possible in any other way. And therefore the danger of Torah Shebal Peh is how are we going to avoid forgetting it? How are we going to go over it? How are we going to remind ourselves? How are we going to keep it fresh in our minds? And that's exactly what we saw in Al Anisim. They came to help to enable a forgetting, a putting aside of the Torah Shebal Peh. And now maybe we understand better. In number 7, look at quite a famous, but now perhaps better understood, Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Dostai Rabbi Yanai Mishum Rabbi Meir Omer. So what does Rabbi Meir say? Kol hashocheach davar echad mi mishnato. Anyone who forgets one thing from his Mishnah, from his Torah Shebal Peh learning, ma'ale alav hakosov ki'ilu mitchayv benafsho, is liable, as it were, for their life. It's like a death penalty offense. Shneimar, a pasuk, Raki shame lecha, be very careful, says the pasuk. Ushmor nafshecha ma'od, be really, really careful. Pentishkach et advarim asher ra'u einecha. Don't forget the things that you saw. And the Beis Halevi has a beautiful piece where he says, this is not talking about Torah Shebechtav. That if you forget Torah Shebechtav, it's as if, it's a capital issue. You can just go and look it up again. This is talking about Torah Shebal Peh. And of course, now that Torah Shebal Peh is written down, that makes this a little bit easier, but still at the end of the day, Torah Shebal Peh is something which is very, very, very precious. So what's this got to do with Chanukah? So I want to explore with you an idea that I find personally very engaging, which is this transition. And we talked about some elements of this before. I learned with you a couple of years ago Rav Kook's piece, Chacham Adif Minavi, but I'm not going to have time to learn that today. I'd like to look at some other angles today. The idea of the transition from prophecy to Torah Shebaal Peh, to the oral law, and that is exactly what Chanukah is all about. The Gevurah, the discipline of creating a system of oral law, is what's going on here. So let's have a look at some of these ideas together. Number 8 is very well known. Pirkei Avos talks about the Shalshelet Torah, the chain of Torah. I'm not going to learn it all in detail, but as you know, Moshe Kibbel Torah Misinai, Umasher Yeshua, this process of Masorah. It's handed on down to Yeshua to the Zekanim, and then it says the Zekanim, the elders, the Nevi'im, handed it over to the prophets. Okay, they seem to be part of the chain of tradition. And they went to the Super Sanhedrin at the beginning of the Bai Sheni period, the men of the Great Assembly. And then you have Shimon HaTzadik, Mishiari Knesset Gedola. He was one of the last of the Knesset Gedola. And then Antigonus Ish Socha, who you immediately see has a Greek name. This is not like a bad Greek name. This is obviously good. He was one of the leaders of the Jewish people. I gave a shir many years ago about having a Jewish name or a non-Jewish name and the issues. It's one of the shirim online there. I feel particularly connected with this idea because even though my name is Abraham, because that's my name and I'm very happy, and I'm married to someone called Sarah, which works really well. Actually, it's a great. You can imagine what they told me at the Sheva Brachas every night. Kol Ashet Tomar Alecha Sarah Shma B'Kola. It was a gift. We have a son named Yitzchak. He's absolutely right, but we do not have any Ishmaels at all. So we're not talking about that right now. And yet, no maidservants, I can assure you. We have a dishwasher. I don't know if that. So what's going on here with? But I'm saying, even though I'm called Abraham on my passport, it says Anthony, which is a non-Jewish name. The question is how does that work? And in America, I'm called out for that all the time because they say you can't be a rabbi and be called Anthony because the two things don't work together. Because Anthony is Italian American, whatever. Not for now. So Antigonus Ish Socho Kibel Meshimon HaTzadik, and then you have the pairs. Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan. Then you have Yeshua ben Parachi and Itar Beli, Yehuda ben Tamai and Shimon ben Shetach, Shammai v'Atalion, and finally Hillel and Shammai. Now I brought you in the little sort of chart here what was going on at the same time as these people. And there are some important things to just pull out. Shimon HaTzadik, the famous midrash about him meeting who? Alexander the Great. More about that in a little bit. Antigonus of Socho, during his time, there was the Septuagint, the translation of the Tanakh into Greek, and that translation is a whole shir in of itself, which I can't go into now. It's found in Jewish sources. It's found in Philo of Alexandria, which you could also say is a Jewish source, but it's a slightly different kind of Jewish source. It's found, of course, in the letter of Aristeas, which is an ancient second, 3rd century BCE Greek source, which also records it, and it's all recorded in slightly different ways in each of those. And that would be, maybe we should have a shir on what exactly was the problem of translating the Torah into Greek. Although now that we have a Torah in Greek, Chazal Paskin, the Rambam Paskins this, that if a Sefer Torah is written in ancient Greek, it's still kosher, which is fascinating. Meaning if a Sefer Torah has one letter missing in Hebrew, it's possible, you can't use it. But if the whole Torah is written in ancient Greek, then it's a kosher Sefer Torah. Leaving aside whether we have access to ancient Greek today to be able to do that accurately, that idea is a very interesting idea of the connection there again of Greece and Torah, which we're not getting into so much today. But then the Chanukah story, you'll see Yeshua ben Parachia and Nitzar Beli. During their time, it was the Chanukah story, and then Yanai HaMelech, civil war, and then the Romans came in, and Judea was captured and destroyed eventually by the Romans. But the Nevi'im, the prophets, who were part of that whole chain of Masorah, are obviously central to Judaism. Just look for a second in number 9. When God says to the Jewish people, where are you going to get your Torah Shebaal Peh from? Who is going to give you God's word that is not written down in the book? Who's going to do that? So look at number 9. So Moshe says to the people in Dvarim, Ki hagoyim ha'eleh, these other nations that you're going in to conquer, the Canaanites, etc., asher ata yoresh otam, el ma'aynanim ve'el kaismim yishma'u. Who do they turn to? Soothsayers, magicians, astrologers. That's where they get their, if you like, oral law. God doesn't let you do that. That's just shtuyot, that's nonsense. It's superstitious. God's going to give you Nevi'im. Elav tishma'un. Listen to the Navi. Instead of the soothsayer and the magicians, listen to the Navi, listen to the Nevi'ah. And he says, just like you asked in Chorev, when God appears to the people at Sinai and they say, this is too much, we can't cope with this anymore, we don't want it anymore, let's give it to us through you, Moshe. And God says, great, that's a good reaction. And Moshe says, okay, you spoke well, and you're now going to get Torah, not directly from God, but through a Navi. So the Navi, if you like, the Nevi'ah was the original source, brought down here, of the non-written Torah. And therefore, Nevi'im were an essential part of our entire life as Jews. The question, which we're going to look at in a second, is, well, does that include halakha? Or does that not include halakha? Is that just life coaching? Not just, it's very important life coaching. What is this Torah of the Navi that we have to listen to? Just go over to page number 3. And you'll see, of course, Nevi'im originally were not so popular, if you like. There weren't so many Nevi'im. When Shmuel hears his nevuah, he was the first real main principal Navi after the Torah was written. Obviously, Yeshua was a Navi as well, but Shmuel was much more important. The Hanar Shmuel Misharetit Hashem Lifnei Eli. So Shmuel, he was living with Eli as a servant there, as a Levi in the Mikdash. Udvar Hashem Haya Yakar B'Yamim Hahem. God's word was very precious, very little, very few people had it. Ein Chazon Nifratz. This word Chazon is very important. Chazon, seeing. The Navi understood things with a clarity of sight, okay, albeit through an aspeclaria she'enu me'ira, through a lens which was somewhat foggy, but there was a seeing. When you look through a lens, you see something. Chazon, prophecy, was not so commonplace, but Shmuel was the one, of course, he didn't know himself he was getting it. He was one of the first to, if you like, bring prophecy into the world in a significant way. We'll see soon why that was. But eventually prophecy became enormous. Look at number 11, Tana Rabbanan. There were 48 male Nevi'im and 7 female Nevi'os. And we'll see that wasn't the only ones. But they never changed the written Torah. They never changed the written Torah. Did they change the oral Torah? Not clear. Chutz mimikra Megillah, apart from Megillat Esther, that was added in to the Tanakh, but the prophets themselves didn't change the Torah in that way. So what did they do? We'll see in a minute. Number 12, just before we get to that, Harbe Nevi'im amdu lahem l'Yisrael, and there were many prophets. Kiflaim ki yotze Mitzrayim, twice the number that came out of Egypt. Okay, that may not be a literal thing, that there were literally 1.63 million or whatever, but there were hundreds of thousands of prophets. But we have in our Tanakh whatever was needed of prophecy for the generations. Whatever wasn't needed, we don't have. But it wasn't just 48 prophets and 7 Nevi'ot prophetesses. It was thousands, tens of thousands. If you were living in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, it's trying to say to you, if you had an issue, you go to your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law, your uncle, your nephew was a prophet, your niece. There were prophets in your family, Nevi'im all around you. And they were there. The question is, for what? What were they there for? So there's a fascinating and fundamental debate about this, which is not necessarily resolved, although you only ever hear one side of this debate in most circles. The Rambam is absolutely clear that a Navi may only input in non-halachic issues. Non-halachic issues. Look at number 13. Says the Rambam in the introduction to the Mishnah Torah. Introduction to the Mishnah, Vada. You must know this. Shehanavi lo to'il bi'iyun b'perushei haTorah. A Navi doesn't do anything to explain perush of the Torah. V'limidat hadinim, in teaching halacha, b'yud gimel amidas, in using interpretation. The Navi doesn't do anything. Ela mashi yase Yoshua Pinchas be'inyanei ha'iyun, whatever Yeshua and Pinchas, the original Nevi'im after Moshe, were doing in terms of Torah learning, the hadin, and in terms of halachic ruling, hu mashi yase Ravina v'Ravashi. Fascinating. Whatever Yeshua and Pinchas were doing, it was not using their prophetic side. It was the same as Ravina and Ravashi, meaning they were working as Rabbonim. They were working as Talmidei Chachamim. The Rambam says there's an absolutely strict separation of powers. If you were to go to Yeshayahu Hanavi and say to him, I need life coaching. I need to know, should I marry this man? Should I take this job? Should I live in this place? Should I be part of this community, that community? Help me out here. Yeshayahu would have had, or whoever was the Navi that you were most close to, and there were thousands and thousands, good advice for you. Let me go into prophetic mode. Let's talk to God. Let's see what God wants. That, if you like, was your oral connection with God. But if you'd have gone, says the Rambam, to Yeshayahu Hanavi and said, you know something, I'm really sorry to say this again, but I've just dropped my milchik spoon into my chicken soup again, and I want to know what the halacha is. So apart from him saying, well, you should know yourself by now, because this is the 5th time you've asked me that shaila, he would have to say, okay, stop, I need to go offline. Off with the Navi hat and on with the Talmid Chacham hat. He has to go offline. He has to kind of turn off the Wi-Fi, go onto airplane mode or whatever they did. No Wi-Fi. Because I cannot, the Rambam says, Yeshaya would say, I cannot give you a psak based on Nevuah. Why not? Because that's called Lo B'Shamayim here, and that's called source number 14. And there he goes into in detail. He says, if a Navi gives a psak halacha based on Nevuah, they are obligated in the death penalty. They're a Navi Sheker, they have to be executed. And the reason is at the end he says, because of Lo B'Shamayim Hi. Ulefikach, last line of number 14, Amru Alei Mashal, and that's why the rabbis say, Ein B'Navi Rishai L'Chadesh Davar Me'ata. They can't make anything new up in halacha. This is often taught, but this is not the position of the Kuzari. The Kuzari says very interestingly, number 15, as follows. Amar Kuzari, Eichitachein, how could it possibly be? Okay, Eichitachein. How does Nevuah go with the mitzvah of Bal Tosif and Bal Tigra? Not to add, not to take away from the Torah. Amar Chavis, so in the Kuzari, the rabbi answers the king, Lo nema zeh ela lahamon. Fascinating. This idea of not adding on to the Torah, that was just said to the regular people like me. The Hamon. Why? So they wouldn't make stuff up. People are going to say, I have a great halakhic interpretation of the Torah. It means this, or it means this. And they'd just be chachamim from their own minds. Torah. They were Torahs, they make up their own Torah. From their own analysis. Just like the Karaites do. So the everyday people were told, you can't add to the Torah. And therefore it's telling you, listen to the Nevi'im, Moshe, even after Moshe, and from the priests and from the Kohanim, from the judges, we just saw that. What does Bal Tosif mean? Don't add on what? To what? Completely different to the Rambam. Says the Kuzari, the job of the Nevi'im and the Nevi'ot was exactly that. Torah Shabbal Peh. They were the ones interpreting the Torah and giving over, creating Torah Shabbal Peh. Not like the Rambam. And actually Rav Kook makes it very clear in number 16. Shitat HaKuzari, the view of the Kuzari, Hishea Nevuah v'Ruach HaKodesh Messiah Lahora, is that Ruach HaKodesh, Nevuah, is part of the process of Psak Halacha. The like of Divrei Rambam, not like the Rambam, Shemachalkam, who makes a very strict separation between them. And in fact, Rav Kook says, and that's why it says in Pirkei Avot that the Zekanim handed it on to the Nevi'im. What, the Nevi'im as Nevi'im? The whole thing's about Halakha. The beginning of Pirkei Avot is about the transmission of Halakha. So why does it say the Zekanim gave it to the Nevi'im if the Nevi'im had no halachic role? He said, that makes no sense. Of course the Nevi'im had a halachic role. So how do you understand this machlokas? It's like completely contradictory. The Rambam says, no, Torah stops at Sinai, that kind of Torah, and the Nevi'im have no ability to continue it. And the Kuzari says, no, on the contrary, the Nevi'im are a continuation of the Sinai process. So look at this wonderful posuk in number 17, and then we'll get into Chanukah in a couple of seconds. Says the posuk in Dvarim, at Dvarim ha'eli diber Hashem el kol ka'alchem. Moshe says that God spoke this at Sinai to all of your congregation. Mitoch ha'eish, behar, on the mountain, mitoch ha'eish, v'ha'anan, v'ha'arafel, and what was it? Kol gadol v'lo yasaf. A great voice that never, yasaf. Never what? What's yasaf mean? Rashi, number 18. V'targumim lo pasak. It never ended. There's no sof. There's ein sof. There's no end to Sinai's revelation. Sinai's revelation goes on. Ki kol ha'chazak v'kayam la'olam. Because the voice of Sinai goes on forever. Davar acher, alternative explanation, says Rashi, lo yasaf, lo hosif. It did not continue. La'arod ba'oiseh pumbi, there was no more revelation. Wow. Two completely opposite understandings of Rashi. Lo Yasaf means it never continued, and Lo Yasaf means it never ended. Take your pick. Which one you're gonna? Well, one is the Rambam, that it never continued. It was the Sinai and not the Nevi'im. And one is the Kuzari, which is it never ended because Nevuah was a constant chain of revelation. And in fact, and I want to now bring it to Rab Tzadok Cohen. Rab Tzadok Cohen of Lublin talks about this a lot. He's very interested in this transition from the Nevi'im. Why did the Nevi'im end? Why were there no more Nevi'im in the Second Temple? We don't hear of any Nevi'im in the Second Temple, other than the very beginning, Chagai, Malachi, Zechariah. And also, important question, where were the rabbis in the First Temple? Meaning, look at Second Temple time, look at Yanai, look at the stories of the Hashmonaim. It's always the king, the Sadukim versus the rabbis, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin said that. Why do we not hear anything about the Sanhedrin in the First Temple period? Now, there was a Sanhedrin, it's in Baal Otzchai, to put together 70 Zikanim plus Moshe, that's 71. But why do they not figure in Jewish history in a major way in the First Temple? So Rab Tzadok says, and you can read this in English later, he said it's obvious. Because during the time of the Nevi'im, he goes with the Kuzari, the Nevi'im were the people who were giving over Torah Shabbal Peh. They were the ones giving over Torah Shabbat to the people. And the rabbis had a much, smaller role. They were judges, they were adjudicating cases, etc. But the role of Torah Shabbal Peh was the Nevi'im. When they stopped, it was handed over to the rabbis. And therefore, Torah Shabbal Peh, as we know it today, as a rabbinic institution, was really kick-started in the Second Temple period, at the story of Chanukah. And we'll see this in a minute as being absolutely critical. But his understanding here is that we listen to the Nevi'im, and then we hand it over to the Chachamim. Why and how did that happen? Look in 23. So let's look at this quickly, and we'll see how Chanukah works. Number 23. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Soif, Nevi'im, Havu. So the Chazal tell us that Nevuah ended the beginning of the Second Temple period. The last Nevi'im that came up from Bavel and founded the Second Commonwealth, the Second Beis Hamikdash, were Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. Malachi, by the way, is associated with Mordechai as well. Maybe Malachi is Mordechai, and that's obviously the Purim story. 25 say Chazal, Lemanatzeach al Ayelet HaShachar. Ayelet HaShachar. Who is Ayelet HaShachar? Esther, which of course, Ayelet HaShachar is, of course, Venus, the star of Venus, Phosphorus and Vesperus in the evening, Phosphorus in the morning, which, of course, is the same star, which is Astarte, which is Esther is her non-Jewish name, right? Her Jewish name is Hadassah, and Esther is her non-Jewish name, and Astarte is where the English word star comes from. The word star is from the ancient goddess, the ancient Babylonian goddess, Persian goddess Astarte, which is Esther's name. She is the morning star. What does this mean? Says Chazal, Lamanatzer al Ayelet HaShachar, Amar Rav Asi. Lama nimshela Esther l'Shachar. Why is Esther compared to this morning star in the morning, the dawn of a new day? Lo melacha ma shachar sof kol halayla. Just like the morning is the end of a dark period. Af Esther sof kol hanissim. So too, Esther is the end of all nissim, the end of all miracles. Now, before we even finish the source, that's strange. Miracles were a dark period, and Esther represents the end of the darkness and the beginning of the dawn. Now, that's not how I would have thought it would be. Also, Esther, it represents the end of Nevuah as well. We'll see in a minute. She's the last of the Neviot, basically. So that's also the end of a dark period and the beginning of a new dawn. Says the Gemara, Ha'ika Chanukah? What are you talking about? Miracles? This is Chanukah. No. Nitna lichtav ka'amrina. We're talking about miracles in the written Torah. In the written Torah. Therefore, Chazal point out, Chanukah has a completely different identity. It has an identity in the oral Torah. Think about it. Who saw the miracle of Chanukah? Nobody. Almost nobody. It was in the menorah. Who was looking at the menorah? A few Kohanim that were walking in there every now and then. It wasn't a public miracle in the way that the Jews felt. Purim, the entire Jewish nation, Mihodu ad Kush, felt that they had experienced this miraculous saving of Esther and Haman and Mordechai. There cannot be a more public miracle. Of course, it wasn't a miracle in the sense that fire came down from the sky, but that's the whole point of the Megillah, right? To understand that this is no less miraculous, that God works through the historical process. There cannot be a greater contrast between Purim and Chanukah. Purim, the miracle that most people in the whole of history saw, and Chanukah, the miracle that the least people in the whole of history saw. A few Kohanim in the Mikdash saw this miracle of the flame, and he says that's a different category completely. Okay, 26, and then we're into Chanukah. So when did Nevuah really end? What was the Makeba Patish? What was the point? What was the moment? What was the key impetus to end the miraculous age? Number 26, from Sefer Daniel, says Seder Olam Rabbah, Va'amad Melech Gibor. It predicts, Daniel says, the king will arise, a great king, a Gibor, with Gvurah, a powerful king. Umashal Memshal Rav, and he'll have an enormous kingdom, Va'asakir Tzanoah, and he'll be able to do whatever he wants. Say Chazal here, say the Olam Rabbah, which is attributed to Rabbi Yosei, Hu Alexandrus Mokdon. This is a reference to Alexander the Great. Shemalach Yud Bet Shana, and he reigned for 12 years, and of course his kingdom was all the way from Greece all the way to India. So what's with Alexander? Says the Gemara, or the Seder Olam Rabbah, Ad Kan, up until this point, Hayu Hanavim Mitnabim Beruach HaKodesh. Up until this point, we had Nevuah. We had this lifeline to truth through Nevuah. Up until this point, Mikan ve'elech, from this very point onwards, Hat aznacha ushma divrei chachamim. Now learn to put your ear out, and now listen to the chachamim. Meaning Chazal themselves are telling us this is a turning point. This is the axial sort of point at which we're told to stop listening to Nevi'im. There will be no more Nevi'im. There'll be no more Chazon. There'll be no more vision in that way. What there will be now is thinking, shmiya, understanding, Torah Shabbal Peh, that you mustn't forget that you need to revise that's central to Judaism. And that is actually a critical issue, and we'll see now the direct relationship with Chanukah. Number 27, very famous Gemara, where God took the Jewish people to Sinai, and I'll tell you this outside, you know this, you've all heard this 1,000 times, that we stood under the mountain, and the mountain was held over our heads, and we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, very nice. Okay, fine. But the Gemara then says, but that's what happened then. I mean, that was by force. How can you tell the people that they really accepted Torah when they were forced to? What's the answer? Purim. Kimu v'kiblu. When it came to Purim, Kimu v'kiblu. Kimu v'kiblu. Kiblu is written without a vav at the end, as if it was kibel, as in one person. Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, a repetition of Sinai. And again, you've heard this 100 times, the idea that at Purim, the Torah was re-accepted in a more voluntary way, i.e. the people saw God without having a mountain held over their heads, i.e. metaphorically speaking, I don't need you to give me a miracle out loud, as a fire from the sky, in order for me to see the miracle in God. They saw it in the Purim story. But less well known is this Midrash, number 28. The Jewish people didn't accept the Torah originally until the mountain was over their heads. Hashem says to Israel, if you accept the Torah, great. And if not, you'll be buried here. Now, says the Midrash, and if you want to ask, that God forced them to receive the written Torah by putting a mountain over their head. This is an obvious question. How can we say that the original Torah was given to them by force, by coercion, with this, as it were, mountain over their heads, metaphorically? They said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Doesn't sound very forced. They said, we'll do it completely. Sorry, skips a line. 1 second. Yeah. That's because the written Torah is relatively easy. How hard is it to learn Tanakh? How long is it? You can do it very quickly. Not very quickly, but you can do it. It's an achievable goal. But when God said to them, Torah Shabbal Peh, there's that as well. Sheyesh ba dikdukei mitzvahs, there's all the details. Kalas v'chamuras, easier ones, harder ones. V'hi azah kamavet. It's like death learning Gemara. It drives you crazy. Page after page after page of tiny little diukim and digdukim about something you don't really care about anyway. Like, how am I ever going to learn this? The kasha k'she'ol. It's like hell. I mean, this is a really, really strong source. Okay? It's like, it's terrible. And here's what I said before. Because Torah Shabbat Peh can only be learned by someone who has real dedication, real love for Hashem. B'chol liboy, u'b'chol nafsho, u'b'chol miyodo. Like I said before. Therefore, what's it saying? What did the Jewish people accept willingly at Sinai? The written Torah. But the oral Torah, who needs it? Who wants it? We don't want that. Says God, I'm sorry guys, it's a package deal. Mountain overhead, you've got to take the whole thing. Okay, you insist, we don't want it, but we'll take it. Later at the Purim story, they were able to be more mature. They were able to say, you know something? I think we're ready for this now. We're able to take this. They accepted willingly. What did they accept willingly? They accepted willingly the Torah Shebaal Peh that they'd been forced to take before. And Rav Tzadok creates a whole narrative out of this, which is fascinating. He says the Jewish people were originally meant to accept Torah Shebaal Peh, but they were immature at Sinai. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't take it. They didn't want to put the work in. Like, kids and teenagers, they don't want to do the hard work. So God says, I'm sorry for now, I'm going to have to force you. You'll do it. Did they do it? Not really. Then Rav Tzadok HaKohen comes and brings all these Gemaras that said they asked Yeshua, please, go to God and ask him directly. And Yeshua says, no, it doesn't work that way anymore. You've got to do it yourselves. And the people says, no, I don't want it. They say to Shmuel, you go to God and ask him directly. And Shmuel says to them, it doesn't work that way anymore. But they won't take it. So eventually, what does God do? God says, okay, you know something? For now, says Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, he says, I give in. I'll send you Nevi'im. I'll spoon feed you. I'll give it to you. Yeah, fine. You can't deal with it. Fine. Go to a Navi, ask them a Shaila. They'll tell you the answer. Don't bother having to work it out yourself. Don't bother going through all the analysis. Go to a Navi, go to a Nevi'ah, like the Kuzari says, and they'll spoon feed you. Eventually, Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says, the people worked out, and they said, you know something? We can work this out for ourselves. And Hashem's saying, that's exactly what you were meant to have done all along, but now you're able to do it. Now you've realized that you actually have the autonomy, the ability, the responsibility to think through Torah Shebaal Peh for yourself. And it's actually fascinating. There's a whole discussion about something called an axial age, that around about the time of the Chanukah story, the Purim and the Chanukah story, many civilizations all around the world stopped turning to direct voices from God and started turning to their own analysis. We were not the only people that did this. James Kugel actually has a very interesting book about this, if you're interested in that area of... But for example, think about the Greeks. The Greeks would go to the oracle at Delphi and they would ask for this voice to come out and tell them what to do. And at a certain point, Socrates and the pre-Socratics and Aristotle said, you know something, that's just a load of nonsense. We really need to work this out for ourselves, and going to the oracle at Delphi is actually not the way forward. Again, lahavdil between the two, but there are a lot of examples of this in other places too, and therefore Rav Tzadok HaKohen has that idea. Look at number 30. Where does this connect with Chanukah? Amar Rav Kiya bar Ashi Amar Rav. Hamadlik ner shel Chanukah. If someone lights a Chanukah candle, tzarich levarich, they have to make a bracha. What's the bracha? My mevarich. What do they make a bracha? Mevarich asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. The bracha is lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Heichen tzivanu. Where is the command? God commanded us to light the Chanukah candles. So the Gemara answers, Rav Avia Amar, Miloi Sasur, it's the mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. The mitzvah to listen in the Torah, to listen to rabbinic law, which the people had not really been prepared to do up until then. We learned that out from Vitzivanu in Chanukah. So when we light the Chanukah candles, we're really saying God commanded us to listen to the rabbis, and the rabbis commanded us, Chazal, I don't mean today's rabbis. I mean the rabbis as part of the halachic process in the Gemara, etc. The rabbis commanded us to light Chanukah candles. Now let me ask you. You could have asked this question on every single the rabbinic mitzvah that we make a bracha on. Why does it say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat? Why does it say so many? Al bir chometz. You can list probably 30 brachas he could have picked and said, where was the command? The command was to listen to the rabbis. No, the one that he picked was Chanukah. Dafka Chanukah. Because at Chanukah, that's when the switch was made, where we went from Navi to Chacham, and that's why it stresses it so much. And actually, there's another interesting idea in terms of Gevurah, the idea of systematizing of categorizing halacha, of making its structures. Rav Tzadok HaKohen said in that source that we just skipped over, that the Torah Sheba'al Peh, as we know it, really started at the time of Chanukah. These are the names. Think about which are the first people that we see mentioned in the Mishnah. They're the rabbis from the time of Chanukah. And that itself is a kind of gevura, it's a kind of organization. There's the creative process of halacha, and then there's the organization, the discipline of halacha that comes later with the rabbis. Let's look at the last page, and I think you'll see some fascinating ideas that we can finish with. Look at number 31. Amar Rav Avdimi Demin Haifa. Rav Avdimi from Haifa says, from when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Nevuah was taken from the Nevi'im, and this must be in the first Beis Hamikdash, because there were no Nevi'im in the second Beis Hamikdash. The Nevuah was taken from the Nevi'im and given to the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, Ata Chacham loy naviyu? The Chachamim don't have any of their own Nevuah? No, Hachika Amar. Afal Pisha Nitla min Nevi'im, even though Nevuah was taken from the Chachamim, from the Nevi'im, sorry. Mina Chachamim loy nitla. It wasn't taken from the Chachamim. Amar Ameima from that. Ameima says, Chacham adif minavi. A Chacham is better than a Navi. And I'm not getting here into an analysis of what's the difference between Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh. The Rambam talks about this. They can mean the same thing. They can mean different things. That's a whole other share, not for now. But the Gemara here says, you might have thought that the Nevi'im are on a higher level than the Chachamim. Oh, the Nevi'im, they talk to God directly. No. Chacham adif minavim. Remember what we just learned? Esther was the end of the darkness, the end of the miracles. That was a time of immaturity for the Jewish people. Now they can do it alone. They have their own gvura. They've grown up. They have their own relationship with Torah. Look at this amazing Midrash 32. Dvarim shaloi niglu leMoshe, niglu leRabbi Akiva v'chaveirav. Rabbi Akiva and his co-rabbis who darshaned, the drash was the process of interpretation, they perceived things that Moshe Rabbeinu never perceived. If it hadn't said this in the Midrash, then you would have thought you can't say such a thing. Wasn't Moshe the ultimate Nevuah? Yeah, he was the ultimate Nevuah, but he was a Nevuah in a different way. Rab Tzadok says, look in 34 for a second, why does it say there's that famous story where Moshe Rabbeinu goes to the Beit HaMidrash of Rabbi Akiva and he doesn't understand what they're saying? This is exactly this point. Why does Moshe not understand Rabbi Akiva? Ubemidrash Rabbah derasa einav shel Rabbi Akiva masha loy ra Moshe Rabbeinu. Rab Tzadok HaKohen. We're on the second line of 34. The after loy kam kamoi, even though it says no, come on, there was never a Navi like Moshe. No one ever came like Moshe. Hainu mitzad hasigasu derech re'iyah. That's re'iyah. No one ever perceived through re'iyah. Chazon, re'iyah. It's the same word. Perception through sight. No one ever perceived like Moshe. V'loy nitgale gam kol mashe talmid vatik atid lechadesh. And Moshe perceived through this prophetic idea even what a later student would understand. Moshe had the greatest and the furthest. V'afil mashe Rabbi Akiva atid lechadesh. He knew on a certain level what Rabbi Akiva would do. Ela shehakol haya hitgalut nevuah derech re'iyah. But it was a nevuah to Moshe through sight, through a certain prophetic vision. V'lo derech hasaga sichlit. Hasagot sichliot. What's sechel? Intellectual analysis. Moshe didn't have that. Moshe didn't do that. That's what Rabbi Akiva did, and that's why Rabbi Akiva, on a certain level, was on a much higher level than Moshe Rabbeinu. And in the last two pieces of the Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, which I'll explain to you outside, first of all, he says that people who are on a lower level, who are sitting, if you like, in the dark compared to others, can perceive light better than people who are in the blinding light. He says there's something about a blinding light, like the blinding light of prophecy. I don't know if Moshe Rabbeinu was in front of us, if Yeshaya Hanavi was in front of us, if Yirmiyahu was in front of us. We just can't cope with it. It's a blinding light of Nevuah. You can't see if the light is shone in your eyes. You can't see that. But if it's dark, and your eyes get used to the dark, then a tiny little flame illuminates the whole room, he says. And that's what he means, that the Chachamim were, of course, objectively speaking, on a lower level than Moshe and the Nevi'im, but in terms of the amount of illumination they could give to the people, they were on a higher level. And then he invokes in number 36 this beautiful idea of dwarves on the shoulders of giants, which is not originally a Jewish idea, by the way. You find it first in Christian sources in the Middle Ages, but then it finds its way into the sort of Jewish repertoire. People quote it as a great one-liner. There are others like that as well. There are stuff that you see quoted in the Ran, which originally comes from Augustine. It's very interesting, but that's not for now. In terms of the great one-liners, dwarves on the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton also used this line a lot. Meaning what? Meaning we're always bought into this narrative that everything gets lower and lower and lower as each generation goes on. And actually, you could even challenge that narrative and say maybe that's not the only way to see the world. When people say this to me, I usually ask them, do you really feel that you live in a world which is less, a world you want to live in than 500 years ago? I don't think anyone in their right mind would have wanted to live 500 years ago, okay? But anyway, even if you subscribe to that, the Rabbi Tzadok says, it's not like we have to start from scratch in every generation. Yeah, we might be smaller than the last generation, but we sit on their shoulders. They don't close off everything and we start. That's the frustration of teenagers, right? That they have to kind of make the mistakes all over again, and they won't listen to you when you say, like, I already tried that, it doesn't work. Please try something else, okay? You've got to find that out for you. It's Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, right? God told them what's good for them, but no, they've got to do that own thing. But in principle, you stand on the shoulders of giants. Therefore, your seichel, our seichel, can actually cut through that. And just with a last thought in the last minute, that's one of the reasons why we make a special bracha on two foods. When you squeeze a fruit, it downgrades because you can't do better than the natural fruit. You take an orange, it's Brei Priya Eitz, you downgrade it to shahakol, any other fruit. There's two exceptions. Two exceptions. What are the two exceptions? There's grapes, meaning if you squeeze grapes, it upgrades the bracha to Borei Pri Hagafen, and olives. Olives is the other one. Says the Gemara, really, when you squeeze olives, you should make a new bracha, Borei Pri Hazayit. But we can't say Borei Pri Hazayit because Zayit's too ambiguous because the Zayit is the word for the tree and also the word for the fruit, which is Gafen, it's not. Okay, so he says, you know what? If you're drinking olive oil in order to be healthy or whatever, but you actually taste nice or whatever, usually you drink it in something else or you just drink it as medicine, you make a bracha, Borei Pri Ha'etz. That's the bracha on olive oil, Borei Pri Ha'etz. Because of all the different fruits, wine and olives, wine represents Purim, olives represents Chanukah. They are the two areas in which actually when we get involved, we're saying we actually upgrade the idea. It's not downgrading it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to us, you engage in the Torah Shabbat Peh. You upgrade the Torah. You have the Gvura. Don't forget it and upgrade it, and we can make an even higher bracha than the way it was originally created. There are so many ideas here which are related to Chanukah. Please think about them. Talk to me about them. Talk to your family about them. Chanukah is an amazing festival, and it's not just about a little light, a light that you're not even meant to use because it's not a light as a light. It represents the light of Torah. Please God, we should all be blessed, and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren should be blessed with that light. Admire the Esrim.